Cheers.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk lagers.
Yeah.
Amazing Munich Helles here, thank you.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about your lagers.
Yeah.
What are these tanks?
So we're doing lagers and stuff here, which is amazing. And ever since doing the whole Domans brewing, living in Munich, studying beer in Munich, just the lager thing just stuck onto me, and I love it, and it's been amazing. So we're standing behind a couple our 2 new lagering tanks that we just got in. We started off with 2 in the beginning, and once we kind of filled those up, we're like, okay, those 2 are full. Now what do we do? We need more lagering tanks. So ended up getting 2 more, and the lagers has been they've been a super great thing for us. We've been loving it. People have been drinking them up, which is great, and we've just been nerding out hard on them, and we love it. So just starting off kind of towards the brew house area, we kind of got a brew house that facilitates us doing step mashing, this kind of decoction-ish type procedure. Not a true decoction, but it's still boiling a little bit of the mash, and we feel that has a huge in a nuanced way effect on the beer, because a lot of brewers I talk with, they're like, oh, step mashing, it's almost like a faith. It's we don't believe step mash does anything or whatever this. And it's
the highly modified malts of today.
Yeah,
say you don't need to step mash.
Exactly, yeah. But there's definitely just how people add 2 or 3 or 5% wheat or oats or this. It's you can manipulate enzymes in the mash to kind of create break down protein to create different flavors. All this
acid
other
rest, protein rest,
all this other fun stuff, and decocting also just adds a whole nother layer of malt grain complexity to it. And not all the beers are getting decocted. That's a couple of our bigger, darker beers.
So talk to me about decoction. So it's melanoidins, right? Is what we're trying to.
Yeah. So you're pretty much you're boiling the mash. So traditionally you're removing roughly a third of the mash, and you boil that whole thing to kind of you're breaking down some stuff from the mash, you're creating melanoidins, you're some Maillard reaction, you're just creating some overall complex grain malty notes, and then you transfer that back into the mash, and you kind of louder with that back to the kettle, and just you're layering flavor in a way. And back in the day when malts weren't modified as much, boiling the mash was sometimes a necessity, as these unmalted things, you kind of have to heat it up that much to break it down and cook it and do all that fun stuff. So that, and also the step mashing too. We're usually doing a 2 to 3 step mash on most of our lagers, and usually just a protein rest and 2 separate sack temp rests, and just calling it a day.
So this is a Munich Helles we're drinking. Pilsner malt, obviously. What other malts are in here? Talk to me about the malt.
So this is 100% just all Pilsner malt. Yeah. Pilsner malt. The step mashing is again just kind of adds that we could add some different stuff in there, some different grains, but we feel the step mash is kind of locks a couple different flavors in there that we
creating
really like.
Those long chain sugars, where you're getting a little maltiness.
Yeah, you can do some of that. You could this beer is definitely finishing on the drier end, which is maybe a little bit drier than their normal Helles, which is kind of cool, because the Helles is it's such a crazy style. All right, you want it to be soft and kind of grainy, and it's not a hop forward beer, but you don't want it to be it's never malty and thick and sweet. It's a really fine line of flavors and yeast fermentation and all that fun stuff. So still Pilsner malt, a 3-step mash. No findings or no Werflock, no findings. Just a nice cold fermentation. We're fermenting all of our lagers at around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. So nice and chilly, keeping it crisp.
What hops are in here? Noble hops, obviously.
No,
no noble hops.
No noble hops. This is just this is just alpha acid. This is just a bitter
Magnum
hop
or something.
Just Magnum
okay.
at 60 minutes. Just just one single hop addition right there. We're not really shooting for any hop aroma or hop flavor too much with this beer. It's mostly to me this beer is kind of a showcase of fermentation with beautiful Pilsner malt. But
Speaking of fermentation, yeast. What's the yeast strain on this one?
This is the Augustiner. The Augustiner yeast. We're lucky enough to be able to brew with that yeast, and again, one of my favorite beers. So it's just the Augustiner yeast just creates this really cool, soft kind of fruitness character. Kind of like it's like I love to say like it creates this kind of like this like wet kind of mouthfeel to it, where it's like slippery and like full and like wet in your mouth, but it's like it's not sweet. You know what I mean? So yeah, just kind of like really soft, really smooth, really round, but like still kind of like crisp and dryness to it. It kind of like a crisp biscuitness to it, so to say.
And you were speaking of fermentation. You said you pitch at, what was it, 48?
Yeah, we pitch at 48. We just leave it at 48 the whole time.
The whole time. Okay.
Yeah,
until you do de-rest.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like once you transfer to the lagering tank, we do our de-rest, and then like once we pass de-rest, slowly drop it down. But another kind of fun thing that we love doing is we're actually like we're using a spooning valve on all these lagers, and we're calling it's called like naturally carbonating the beer. I mean, all big breweries do it. Budweiser does it. Like it's a nice way to carbonate your beer. You get to lock in some really cool like yeast fermentation characteristics. You get to, it sometimes adds a little bit of sulfur in there because you're not blowing off the sulfur. But in my opinion, I think like a real, true, awesome like European lager has a nice little twang of sulfur.
If you read the BGCP style guidelines, it has.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
Sure.
And so it's great. So we just kind of like probably like day, depending on the fermentation, depending on like what yeast we're using, day like 4, 5, or 6 of fermentation after brew day. We'll throw a spending valve on the tank and just like kind of keep it around 10 or 15 psi, and then just like let it ferment under pressure the rest of its life. And since the beer is already like at 48 degrees Fahrenheit and it's at that 10 or 15 psi, it's actually like it's absorbing that CO2. So like by the time we're like ready to like fully crash the beer and lager it, like it's pretty much just fully carbonated up already.
So 2-part question.
Yes.
The spunding, that happens on your uni tank or on
the uni tank,
okay.
as in like during active fermentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you move it over to the lagering tank.
Correct.
Okay. So tell me why lagering tank? Why are they horizontal? I guess.
Horizontal. Well, first thing for lagering tank is it's lager. It needs to be stored. So like it frees up. It frees up one of our like main fermentation tanks. So instead of like having the tank in there, having the beer inside that main fermentation tank for like 8+ weeks, we get to transfer it out of there, store it in this tank, so we can actually like continue with brewing more beer in that tank. And then sideways, we always say lagered sideways because it's a sideways tank. And for me, mostly there's definitely some like cool yeast kind of interactions you get. There's the point of as the yeast settles out, it's kind of like it settles out on a flatter, wider surface. So like the yeast kind of has a more surface area in contact with the beer to kind of like finish up its processes, its whole life cycle and everything. And then also it's I think a bigger impact on the horizontal tanks is the clarification. So like on these lagering tanks, let's say gravity's only going one way, so like instead of having like 10 feet of like
head pressure
of head pressure and like 10 feet of distance, so to say, for like all that stuff to drop out, you cut that distance in half and you only have like 3 feet of distance for all that stuff to float out. So it's kind of a good like clarification thing, gives kind of yeast some surface area contact with the beer to help clean itself up, and just kind of gives it like a place to store the beer and do its thing and finish up while we can continue with our normal like weekly brewing operations.
That makes total sense to me, and don't quote me on this calculation, but I think every foot you get 2 to 3 psi of pressure every foot of liquid, right?
Yeah.
So like when you go down in a pool 10 feet, that's why your ears start to pop because that pressure.
Yeah.
So this probably helps with catalysis, things like that. You're not getting all that pressure to make the yeast want to.
True that.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. So we keep it in there. The lager beers are always like they're like a 6 to 12 week kind of process for the most part. For our bigger, we did an imperial, like an 8% imperial dark lager. That was just in the lagering tank for 8 weeks, and it was probably in like the primary fermenter, the conical tank, for like 3 to 4 weeks. So that was like a big chunk of time there. And
I love that you guys are putting that time into it, because a lot of people, we talked about Mike Casey earlier, the quick lager, right? You can make a great lager in a
100%.
quick. He was the one who taught me that method. But I think there is something to be said with the long duration, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I mean it's, you know, like, again, it's just like, you know, it's just about giving the beer, giving the yeast, you know, it's time to kind of like, you know, just to kind of do its thing. Like, you know, time and beer, you know, it's a give and take. Obviously, as past a certain point, time is no good for beer. But like, you know, in the very inception and like the creation of the beer and fermentation, like, you know, giving it its time to fully just like run its course is a beautiful thing. And like, you know, with so many craft breweries and like the demand and like, you know, people just trying to crush more beer. It's like, you know, they're trying to find out ways to shorten things up, and we're just like, no, let's just give it its time. Just make it happy. You know what I mean?
I love
so
that.
yeah, so the lager tanks definitely help out with just kind of making it a little less stressful. It's like, oh, we can just put it in there and just like be a little more happier, not have to worry about like, oh, we have to get it out of the tank.
It's like a bright tank.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's fun. We love these things.
Man, it comes through in the beer.
Thanks,
This is
man.
amazing.
Well, cheers, dude.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Hey everyone, Vito from MoreBeer. We got another episode of the Mashup coming to you, and we're talking with Wynn at Wondrous Brewing about West Coast IPAs.